This is the second ARI Exits workshop. The first one is now called Exit Strategies, and it was originally called Early Exits. And you don't need to see that workshop first to get the benefit of this one. The Early Exits workshop is available online at this URL, and you should have that in your workbooks. And if you ever need to find it later, just ask me. Part of my ambition is to make this information available to as widely as possible. And this is a recording of one of the earlier ACA summits where I delivered the Exit Strategies workshop. But today we're going to be talking about exit execution. And the things we're going to cover this morning are in the Exit Strategies workshop, the things that we do cover are the changes in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, why early exits are becoming much more common, financing companies and how that can impact the exit, the pros and cons of VC follow-on investment, and how to know when to exit, and discussion of why we aren't very good at exits yet. So that's what's in the Exit Strategies workshop, which is not this one. This one is the Exits Execution workshop. And what we're going to be talking about this morning is everything you need to know once you've determined that it's time to start the process. We're going to discuss how long it will take and what the steps are, how to design the optimum exit team, how much it will cost, and how to ensure that you get a fair price and terms when you sell one of your portfolio companies. Any questions on what we're going to cover? The most important thing that I want you to take away from this workshop is that only 25% of saleable companies successfully exit. So what I'm saying is, if you looked at all of the angel-backed companies and bootstrap companies that could have been sold, only 1/4 have successful exits. About another quarter have poor quality exits, and about 50% don't exit at all, ever. We're going to talk about that. Give me a couple more minutes, and then let me see if I answer that question. About half of the people who actually end up selling their companies get less than they should have, which is part of my definition of good exit. So I've seen companies that have sold for tens of millions less than they could have received. And many times, the people that are selling those companies don't even realize they left millions of dollars on the table. I think that's pretty terrifying. And if you were a glass half empty person, that would also be pretty depressing. But I imagine some of you are thinking, why haven't I heard that before? Why isn't this more widely known? One of the challenges with this, and one of the challenges we face as angel investors and the entrepreneurs face, is that even though entrepreneurship is exploding all around the world, and many universities are now offering undergrad and graduate courses in entrepreneurship, and there's a few professors that are starting to conduct some serious research on entrepreneurship, like Wade over here from Willamette. And there's a few nonprofits that are starting to put a little bit of funding into some early research to capture data. We still don't have the data that we need. And here's what I wish we had. I wish we had this big database that tracked startups all the way through their corporate life cycle and included data on how the companies were financed and what their strategies were at different stages and how well they were executed. And then what the eventual outcomes were. How many of them exited, how many of them exited well, how many failed. That's what I wish we had. And then if we had this big database, we could start to do some analysis and determine which strategies correlated with different outcomes and which strategies resulted in the highest probability of entrepreneurial success. And then we could start to develop some best practices. Unfortunately, it's not that easy. And I've had the opportunity to discuss this idea with some of the top entrepreneurship and finance professors around the world. And almost all of us immediately agreed that this is an extraordinarily difficult data set to capture. Because first of all, it would require following these companies through their entire life cycle. And that might be a decade. And we need to track each company and develop uniform ways to measure and capture their corporate strategies at every stage in the company's evolution. And then we have to include things like, the quality of their product strategy and execution, their HR philosophies, even the environment in which they were operating. And even the quality of the CEO and the board are very important inputs to being able to understand what eventually happened. All of this would be necessary if we wanted to really be able to develop some best practices on what works and what doesn't work. And one of the challenges with all this is that the world's constantly changing. So let's imagine we built this big database that we'd like to have back in the 90s. And we spent that decade just analyzing these companies, tracking their progress. I'm pretty sure that what we would discover a decade later was that the best strategy was to build companies towards an IPO. And imagine that we published that around the year 2000, 10 years after the study started. And there's already people smiling in the room. And we said to the entrepreneurs and we said to the angels, build companies and focus them on a public financing, because that's what works best. Of course, we all know that that would have been the worst possible strategy you could imagine for the next 10 years. So there's real challenges with this idea of doing academic research and actually gathering data. And even if we did this, by the way, another thing you have to keep in mind is not all exits are happy ones. We hear these statistics like the Alliance of Angels has a 12% exit rate. Well, that's interesting, but the first thing I want to know is, okay, how many of those were good exits? Well, we don't really know. We don't have the data. And a lot of the exits you hear about are actually failures. And a lot more of them are in that 25% of, yes, it was an exit, but it wasn't a good one. And this is another thing that makes it very difficult to determine what we should be trying to do, because there's also a lot of bad information out there online. A lot of times people who are talking about their exits in the press are making a resume building statement rather than providing us some useful data, because a lot of the angels in the room are going, yes, I understand. I invested in those companies. I got back 0.8 times what I put in 10 years later. And that darn entrepreneur is out there smiling from ear to ear, talking about what a great exit he had. So today, what I want to talk about is I want to talk about successful exits. I want to talk about what you can do to improve the probability that your company is going to have a successful exit. That's the kind that I wish we had in all of our portfolio investments. And ultimately, what I'm saying is we want to think about exits that both happen and are fair to the shareholders. So how do we learn to be better angel investors and entrepreneurs? Now that we kind of, I hopefully agree, we can't wait for the academic research. And even if we started today, even if President Trump said, this is a priority, I'm going to fund this myself, it would still be decades before we had that data. So what we have to do is we have to rely on anecdotal observation. We have to make the most important business decisions based largely on our observations and our discussions. And that's why I think meetings like this are so important. It's an opportunity for us to get together, to share and discuss our observations, to exchange ideas on what's working in today's economy, to challenge ourselves and each other, to apply our collective observations to build the best practices we can for making investment decisions today. Any questions on why we have to rely on anecdotal data, why we can't look in a database and understand more of this better, and why so many of these numbers are so fuzzy? No, we haven't even started. And I think the reason, I was just talking to Wade, the reason is the funding is not available. To be able to do what I would like to see done here is at least a 10-year process. I think it would take tens of millions of dollars. I really do think it's going to need the president or some benefactor to say that this is important to do this research. I think it's critically important for the economy. I think it could actually change the growth rate of the overall economy, because right now, 3/4 of the time, entrepreneurs start a company, angels finance the company, and then it doesn't have a successful exit. Half the time, the entire company is lost just from the lack of this knowledge. So this would be incredibly important, but it doesn't seem that it's likely to happen anytime soon. I'm not hearing about anybody talking about funding this research, unfortunately. So what it means is, it means that the place where these best practices get developed is in meetings like this and at larger meetings like the ACA Summit, where people get together and exchange ideas. That's what we have to do to make the most important business decisions that entrepreneurs make and the most important investment decisions that we as investors make.